What's up, Steven? How are we doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm very good. All right, so today we're going to talk about a couple of different things, but mainly we're going to be focused on the NCAA coming out with new eligibility, 5 for 5. I'm pretty excited to talk about that.
Yeah, it'll be fun, but I think we've got some headlines that we're dressed to discuss first. I have my Schwab Mob shirt and my UNI wrestling hat. You have your Hawkeye wrestling shirt because for the first time since 2011, UNI and Iowa have agreed to duel each other, which I sent you some Instagram graphics that like were posted by other people, like showing that it had been confirmed, and we were both just really excited that it's a thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have thought that this should be a match pretty much the entire time that we've known each other, right? Which is 2013, 2014.
Right?
I'm super excited. I think the three big Iowa schools should wrestle each other every year. And I've thought that since. And especially because in a state like Iowa, wrestling is important. Wrestling does draw crowds. And this year it's going to be at the McLeod Center, which is UNI's big dome. It's big arena. It's basketball arena. I think they're going to sell it out, or they're
Well,
going
I
to come
think
close.
And I believe Cyhawk is at Carver. So
Yep.
this means every year Iowa hosts one of the two if they keep flipping. So it's like when you go to Ames, UNI comes to you, and when you go to UNI, the Cyclones come to you. So for the
It's going to
Cyhawk
be
duel.
awesome.
Yeah. So it is. Yeah, it's really cool for sure.
And I wish this would have been a couple years ago that it would have happened. I think we would have seen some really competitive duels. I think this year, I'm definitely going to favor Iowa. I think they're returning a better team. They picked up some really nice pieces in the portal, but I'm honestly just excited that it's finally happening.
Yeah, well, I'd say it's same, and I think it's kind of good for both programs because
Yeah.
I think it gives you and I an opportunity to be like more on the map in Iowa where they do a lot of their recruiting. But also, like, I think we've said this when we've watched you and I is like you've texted me like the you and I guys like they wrestle so hard
Mhm.
the whole time. Um, and I think Iowa's been accused of pulling in some guys from the portal that look like they don't always do that. So I think I think it's good for both where like Iowa definitely has like a more like blue chip high school recruit as like the average guy on their roster, but UNI has more guys from within the state. And I think they do just have a reputation of like getting those like gritty, ugly points and hustle points in matches. And I think that's something like Iowa wants their team to be, whether it is how they always are or not. So I think like I just think it's like I think it's a good duel for like the state of Iowa, and then for both programs in different ways.
Absolutely. I think it's a net positive for everybody involved.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
I think it's gonna everybody is gonna want to watch it. So I think it's gonna be super highly viewed. And anytime we can have a duel that's got good ratings, it's good for wrestling.
absolutely.
And that's how I view it is I know there's gonna be a lot of eyeballs on it. I'm gonna be watching, I can guarantee that. So I know you will be too. And so I just think overall this is awesome. This is what how it should be. And I hope it continues home and home for time immemorial. All right. All right. So I we didn't talk about this. Have you been seeing the U23 uh scandal, I guess we could say?
Yeah, I'm following it, and I think okay, this is a good example of why the procedures need to be like transparent, and it's
Yes.
so important because I do think like I think there's I guess what are the two weights? 79, 97, and 79,
Yep.
where Levi has earned the 79 U23 spot, but he probably won't go because he's the senior rep.
Yep.
He won Final X, and then so they're gonna choose someone to go because no one else qualified for the U23 spot for the process. So there's not like a next guy. And then 79, nobody made it through the process to qualify. And
Yep.
I think what the process is supposed to be this year is if a senior guy that is U23 age eligible places top 4
Yep.
at in the senior qualifications, they earn the spot or have preference to the spot. And then
Yep.
the question is, what do you do if that doesn't happen? Because it's like, okay, why is this the process? Well, we want our U23 age eligible guys to try to make our senior team,
Yes.
right? Because if Levi only wrestled U23s, we wouldn't have our best senior rep at 79 kilos because it is Levi Haynes and he is
Sure.
U23 eligible.
Yep.
So we don't want him we don't want this like U23 is its own thing. And we want to be able to pull from the senior guys that don't quite make the team.
Yes.
Which would be like Jax Forrest would
That's
be
what I
a
was
good
about to say.
example, right?
61 kilos or
Yeah. So
57. Luke Lilladall.
right.
Perfect.
So
Slide in
so
perfectly.
well, and at 61, it was like Marcus or Jax was going to be the senior rep, but the other one can be the U23 rep. And
Yes.
that's what you want. You
Yes.
want, if they're both age eligible at fine. Okay. But we didn't get that at these two weights at 79 and 97. And then we have the U23 tournament with a weird name in Geneva that's not a team trials tournament.
Correct.
That doesn't really have a bearing on the spot. And then we have like guys that may get chosen for the spot. And it's like the problem is none of the options that are left to do are perfect. Like there's reasons to complain about all of them because I
Yes.
think like at 97 there are rumors that like Josh Barr will be the most likely pick. Okay, Josh Barr beat Camden McDaniel, who won the U23 World Tournament in folk style. Justin Rademacher placed the highest of the three at seniors,
Yep.
but Josh Barr injury defaulted after losing in the semis. Josh Barr also went 92 at
Exactly.
seniors, not
Yep.
97. But then you also have like, if the U23 tournament was really the next piece to make the U23 world team, Josh Barr might have entered it
Yes.
after he didn't make the senior team, right? So some of these guys that might get chosen, like they didn't enter a thing because they knew it had no bearing on the process. And so like you want to create a process where it's very clear which guys are trying to make the team, and then
Yes.
you pick from the best guy that's trying. And the problem with the situation we have now is we didn't have a tournament after seniors when no one placed in the top 4, where we had all the best guys that we know still want that U23
Yes.
spot in the same pool, so we could pick who the best one is in a objective way. And so now it's like Rademacher placed the highest of the seniors but didn't place 4th. I think Josh Barr has the best wrestling resume, and Cam McDaniel had the U23 win. So it's like, I don't know what the right answer is. And then at 79, I think there is like rumors that like Mitchell Messenbrink might be and that one's really weird because like, I think he very clearly chose not to do the senior stuff because he wanted like a break. So you would think we would go with someone that like was at least involved in the process. But again, like, maybe if the process was had some fail safes where we had another tournament, if no one placed in the top 4, it'd be easier to pick. It's just it's a strange situation because I really don't know like what the right answer is, and I think the only way to pick at this point is to just hand pick someone.
Yep.
And it's like we picked Final X, and I think I got 3 wrong and you got 4 wrong. It's kind of hard to hand pick it even out of 2. So,
Yeah.
like that's why we wrestle the matches, right? And
Yeah.
we don't get to wrestle the matches.
And so that was honestly kind of why I wanted to bring it up is, it's very controversial right now. I saw Mark Manning's video, and I saw Willie talk about it, and I've seen the Flow guys talk about it. And really none of them have a good answer, because I think the truth of the matter is there isn't a good answer.
Yeah.
And you are correct. We need to fix the procedures for it. Is we need to have, and I think there's a good way to do it. Is if you are wrestling at Final X, whether it's for a true third, right, or you're wrestling for the spot, and you're U23 eligible, right, then the U23 nationals don't really matter. But we have the time in between the US Open and Final X to let people know, hey, if you want to make the U23 world team, these spots are available, because we don't have anyone that's U23 eligible in Final X, whether it's wrestling for the spot or for true or for third to make the national team. And so I think that's an easy way where we don't have to really have this situation again.
Yeah, there's a couple easy fixes, honestly. You could take top six and the highest of the top six instead of the
Yes.
top four for seniors, and then you would still want your U23 fail safe. But that line being drawn at four kind of makes it a hand picking situation where
Yeah.
I believe if you just went down to five, Rademacher was fifth at
Yes.
97. So
Yeah.
again, like it sounds like Rademacher may not even be the pick, but it's he Rademacher was the closest to going through the process outlined.
Yeah.
Um, and Cam McDaniel was the closest to going through the process last year when
Yeah.
it was different and when U23s was like uh the way the team was chosen if no one placed in the top four. So I think both of those guys have decent claims to the spot,
Yeah.
and may not get the spot. But yeah, it's like we don't want claims. We want
We
um
want objectivity.
yeah, and it's like we don't necessarily want to take whoever our best guy would be no matter what. We want to take our best guy that goes through the process, right?
Mhm.
And so like I think, you talked about PJ Duke, and I think a lot of people would think Mitchell Messenbrink also might be the senior rep at 74 kilos this year.
Yeah.
But like Mitchell didn't do it, and we're not outraged, right? We
No.
know David Carr did the process. We know James Green did the process. We
Exactly.
watched James Green beat David Carr at Final X.
Yep.
And so that's what we're used to, and that's what we want out of U23s too, is not like, kind of twisted Mitchell Messenbrink's arm to be involved on an age group team, but taking the guys that put themselves in the arena and go for the spot and try to select the best one in an objective way from that pool.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't blame Josh Barr for wanting to be on this team either. He participated in the process, and then he didn't know, you know what I mean? Or there was no incentive for him to go to U23 and wrestle
Exactly.
97 there. And in my scenario, it's an easy fix, because if he shows up there and he wins U23s and it's 97, and it's a world team trial for U23s for 97 kilos, we just pick our guy, and or sorry, our guy earns their spot, and we don't have to
Mhm.
pick a guy for the
Yeah,
weight. And I just think that that's something that would be super simple. Um, because I think one thing I've seen from other people when they're talking about it is it's really they're just outraged. They're mad one way or the other. And I think the truth of the matter is you can be upset about it, but we've got to have a solution for it. We can't just
yeah.
be mad about it, you
Well,
know?
and I think some of the, like, when it's like, who would you pick? It's like the argument for Josh Barr is we think if he would have known to enter U23s, he would have likely won it because he has beaten Cam McDaniel a lot of times in folk style.
Yeah.
Well, it's not Cam McDaniel's fault that Josh Barr wasn't in the bracket. And it's also not Josh Barr's fault that he didn't enter because it didn't mean anything to the process. So there was an incentive for him to enter. So you just
Sure.
have this, like, you have people saying, like, well, Josh Barr didn't do it. Okay. But it wasn't part of the process. So why would he? And then you have people being like, well, if he had done it, he would have won. Well, we don't know that. Okay. Because I thought that Stephen Buchanan would beat Kyle Snyder 0 times ever in the history of the times they wrestled. And then I watched Stephen Buchanan win the second match.
Yep.
So, like, it would be a lot easier to feel confident about what would happen in that hypothetical scenario if the process was fixed to incentivize the match to actually happen.
Exactly. Yep. I feel completely same exact way.
All right, third headline. We're gonna, I think, maybe segue this into 5 for 5 because AJ Ferrari is 24 and somehow still has college eligibility with red shirts. And he's in the transfer portal, but he's facing some criminal charges for two different incidents. One like kind of related to a high-speed chase, and one that seems like a domestic violence situation with a couple of charges with it. I think, you know, I don't want to comment on like the criminal piece, but it's like we may not see him commit somewhere else in the portal, I guess, with all this going on. This
I
may be the end of AJ Ferrari's collegiate career.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I hope so. I'm not going to comment on any of the criminal charges or anything, but I'm tired of the AJ Ferrari experience. We could say, um, I just I'm happy, and I think 5 for 5 kind of fixes this, and that's why we're going to segue into it. Um, but he's had enough chances to wrestle at the NCAA tournament, and so I, look forward to him hopefully wrestling freestyle or going into MMA. But I am happy that the college experience is over for him.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I feel. Like, wish him the best in figuring out his off the mat things and hopefully transitioning successfully into MMA or RAF and trying to make senior teams. Um, but like, this is kind of what this 5 for 5 rule does is we have 19, 20, 21, and 22-year-olds competing against other 19, 20, 21, and 22-year-olds. And I think it's harder to uh, defer your eligibility for years and years and years with the new system. So why don't you go ahead and kind of break down what the 5 for 5 rule actually is, and then we can talk about how it will impact wrestling.
All right, so let me share my screen here real quick. I'm going to share. Let's see.
And this is like a cool resource you found that you showed me before we went live for the show.
Yep.
That kind of like, this is from the NCAA breaking down exactly how the new age-based eligibility rules work.
Yep. Is it shown on your screen?
I see it, yes.
Perfect. All right, so NCAA Division I period of eligibility rules are changing starting with the 2026-27 academic year. The new age-based eligibility rule establishes a simpler single 5-year eligibility period tied to age and college enrollment, replacing rules that counted seasons of competition and included multiple waiver options and rules that vary by sport. So rather than the Olympic red shirts and the medical red shirts and everything that we've kind of seen pop up in wrestling, especially in the past couple of years, right? We are seeing a very easy to digest and understand eligibility that goes throughout all NCAA Division I sports. So here's this cool graphic. And right, so your eligibility begins right when you first enroll full time at any collegiate institution or the beginning of the academic school year immediately following your 19th birthday. And so, right, the gray shirts we are going to see probably come to an end, right? Although there's some specific examples that we could talk about. We're going to see the Olympic red shirts come to an end. And we are going to see a lot of changes. All right. And so here it just kind of shows the key shift. Is this highlighting for you?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So it counted seasons of competition before. Now it's a continuous 5-year eligibility period. All right. So you don't just get 4 years to compete and you get 9 years to do it. Right. And we've seen that right with the COVID years, medicals, Olympics, right? It included multiple waiver options in the past. Now we have limited exceptions and they are written into the rules, right? And we'll talk about those. And then it could vary by sport or circumstance. And now it is a consistent framework across all Division One sports. All right. And here are, like I was talking about before, when your eligibility begins, it's either, right, initial full-time college enrollment or the academic year following your 19th birthday. And so that's a really big positive in my eyes. Um, I was actually just listening to Kale talk about this earlier, and when he was talking about it, he was pretty much saying, I don't know why we're giving him 5 years. If we just followed the old rules, everything would be good. But I think one thing that we've seen from the NCAA is they don't really like to enforce things, especially if there is the opportunity to get out of something. And I think this now, hey, here's how it works, and there's no getting out of it. And so
Well,
that's something that I'm happy to see.
yeah, it's also consistent with that kind of like eighth grade holdback that's really common for college eligibility, where a lot of states don't let you compete in your senior year season if you've held back if you turn 19 after a certain date. So this would be if, like, it's, unless you go to like one of those prep schools, if you turn 20 while you're still in high school, you can't compete that year. That's kind of how a lot of states' rules are written. And that's kind of the NCAA is kind of taking those rules that already exist and continuing them for the college eligibility, where it's like, okay, you have to be 18 or 19 as a senior. And then that next year, after you turn 19, your eligibility starts here, whether you got through high school yet or not. So if you
Yep.
do a 19 to 20-year-old year at Blair or Sim or one of those national prep schools that doesn't have to follow the state association age rules, well, you only get 4 years because you turned 19 too late to defer the eligibility. So I do think it's like, it also makes sense where it's consistent with the kind of like the trends of high school athletics that the NCAA, I'm sure, is well aware of, that they're already seeing.
Yep, exactly. And so, like I have here with rules and waivers being eliminated, right? Here's what it's getting rid of red shirts, right? Delayed enrollment rules, sports specific enrollment timelines. One thing I know is they specifically made it after the year that you turn 19 due to hockey. Because many of those hockey athletes spend their 18th year, or their after they turn 18, they spend that year in what's called majors. I kind of nerded out and did a lot of research into this. And so they specifically did that because they couldn't do it after their 18th birthday, because almost all of their players spend this year, and then they decide after that year whether they're going to go to college or they're going to go the NHL route. So
But this is good. Yeah, this is good for wrestling that hockey got that exception, because that eighth grade holdback wrestling kid
yeah,
that exists still gets the 5 years. And if
yeah,
it was after 18, like, yeah, maybe you grandfather in the kids that are coming in this year. But I mean, guys, eighth grade is so far away from your freshman year of
oh yeah,
college. So there are years and years of kids and families that have already made this decision that
yeah,
their kid is now a second year eighth grader or is now a sophomore, right? And they need this age-based eligibility to allow them to get the 5 after that 19th year, like you're talking about.
yep. Um, Another big one is the medical hardship waiver being eliminated. That is huge, especially in wrestling. I mean, how many kids have we seen get an extra 2, 3, 4 years sometimes, right, due to injuries?
Well, and this is one that I think probably wrestling people, at least I would think, have mixed feelings about,
Yeah.
because on the one hand, We do feel like this got kind of like manipulated a little bit, where people would go back and retroactively get a medical for years they didn't start. And
Yep.
maybe if they were the starter, they would have wrestled through the injury. I think the pro of this in wrestling is, honestly, guys, like a D1 wrestler is always somewhat injured.
Yes.
And it was not hard to take that real injury that they may have wrestled through if they were the starter and go back and get a medical for it if they were not the starter. Um, the downside is, I think the same, by that same token of like saying most D1 wrestlers are often injured, is um there it may be very hard to get 5 healthy NCAA tournaments. And if you think of like a Ryan Crookham,
Yep.
like, who we think if he could ever get to that tournament healthy, he would have a very, very good chance to win it. Um, like, this would be a kid that, in this, if he was under this new system, which he won't be, because he would be out of eligibility already. But
Yeah.
if a kid like that was under this new system, like, we would have only gotten one NCAA tournament of Ryan Crookham due to his injuries.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that this is something that, I think for certain individuals this can be really tough for, but I think overall we're going to see a net positive out of it. The exceptions, it's pretty much going back to the rules before we started to see medical red shirts pop up. Um, Active duty military service, um, religious mission, right? And then for female student athletes, pregnancy. And these are pretty much the only three exceptions that we see listed. And then how is this going to look for current student athletes, incoming student athletes, right, and future student athletes? So, right, there's no additional eligibility. I know that was something that was discussed previously. People thought, oh, Jesse Mendez may get another year, or Levi Haynes may get another year, right? They are not going to. Current student athletes, they can fall under either the previous rules, right? So a Ryan Crookham, for example, is going to still have I believe he's going to have 3 years of eligibility left.
But he still has the same amount, and if he gets hurt again, which we hope doesn't happen, but we know he has that track record, he can still take additional medical red shirts, because there's no way he opts into the new rules. And Ryan Crookham is at Iowa now, correct?
Yep. And
Which
then
should be fun.
it should be fun. And then for incoming student athletes, right, prospects who will initially enroll full time at any college or university during 2026-27, they can either go with the previous rules or they can go with the age-based rule, whichever is most beneficial to them. And I think there's some conversations to be had there. And
Yeah,
then,
I think that's one of the places we want to really talk about it when we break this down, because it's obvious like what Ryan Crookham should pick, but I think there's some incoming freshmen and some guys that are already in college that may pick the new way, that, it is kind of like a debate or decision for them.
yep. And then for all upcoming student athletes, right, those in high school and younger going into this academic year, they are going to follow the age-based rule only. So I'm very curious some of the decisions that will be made there. I am happy, right, as we talked about, that it's going to start the academic year following your 19th birthday. Because I do think we would have seen, and we see it in many sports, football, baseball, basketball, wrestling, soccer, where holding your child back is quite common, especially among your upper echelon of athletes. And so I think if it would have started after your 18th birthday, we would have seen a lot of confusion, a lot of people probably skipping their senior year of high school to enroll. And so now I'm happy that it is after your 19th birthday, because I think we'll see, for the most part, almost all student athletes will fall under these guidelines and still be able to compete 4 years in high school with no
And
problem.
yeah, and for clarification on those younger ones, I know we'll talk about specifics later, but if you graduate younger, the clock triggers when you enroll as a freshman, correct? Not when you graduate high school.
Correct.
So there is also still that th for a very small amount of athletes that that graduate when they are, say, 17, there is an option to kind of like wait a year to enroll on purpose, and find a, like a club training situation or an RTC training situation to use as a gray shirt, the way like a Cornell has always had to use gray shirts because you cannot redshirt in the Ivies. Not a ton of kids, because we do see most of them coming out at the ages that are stipulated by the NCAA, but certainly a handful.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll be very curious to see kind of some of the decisions that our upcoming seniors decide to make. Because I do think it'll be very, very curious. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
And then I think now we want to talk about, like, okay, that is the rule. That's why the NCAA made the rule. Again, it's based on the kind of like the situation of college basketball and college football.
Yeah,
But it impacts every sport because all those rules are the same. So there's a lot of places where this impacts wrestling, whether that was the intended effect of the rule or not. So I wanted to talk about who should pick which year of eligibility. I want to talk about lineup flexibility and lineup battles that change because of the rule. And I want to talk about that high school holdback situation and how parents may make different decisions there. Um, where did you kind of want to start with the impact for wrestling?
I think kind of some of the lineups.
Okay,
I think that's
so
and
the
I think really there are two schools that everybody's thinking about right now when it comes to this. Um, right, finished 1 and 2 at the NCAA tournament. They have a lot returning and a lot coming in at both schools. And obviously, I'm talking about Penn State and Oklahoma State. And there's certain weights where Oklahoma State has multiple guys and Penn State has multiple guys. Which one did you want to start with?
oh, I want to start with Oklahoma State because I think their situation is unique in that a lot of the Oklahoma State kids that are in the same spots or are depth pieces are likely to choose the new 5-for-5 rule.
Yes.
And I think when we talk about Penn State, we're going to talk about, like some of those guys are going to be forced to choose the old rule so they can find one more year of window.
Yep.
But like, okay, so I think before we get into the Rainey's Jacks Vega section, it's Rockland Zinkin will probably choose the 5, I would think, even though that puts him in a roster battle with Troy Spratley at 125 for his freshman year. In the old rules, it looked like Zinkin was coming into a really good situation where he would redshirt, Spratley would leave, and he would have a 4-year window to start.
Yep.
But it probably makes more sense to, if you're going to lose that first year of NCAA tournament either way, it probably makes more sense to choose the 5-for-5 because one, he can wrestle off Spratley and try to earn the spot, but also he doesn't have to wrestle a weird unattached schedule to keep the redshirt eligibility
Exactly.
and worry about those 5 matches. He
Yep.
can be 5-for-5. He can wrestle everything Troy Spratley doesn't want to wrestle in. Hit more, wrestle in potentially more than 5 duels, wrestle in potentially more tournaments attached to Oklahoma State and traveling with the team. And if he doesn't start it at the end of the year, it's the same thing as redshirting, and he would still have those 4 years after.
Now we've talked about Rockland Lincoln. Now let's talk about the Rainey brothers because they are an interesting case. So They're coming in, and they're coming in probably somewhere from 133 to 149. I don't see them getting big enough to go 57. And the problem is there's already two really, really good returning true freshman national champions, one at 133 and one at 149 in Jax Forrest and Sergio Vega. And so when we talk about the rules, right, and whether they go with the old system or they go with the new system, we think that the Rainies may actually decide to go with the old system.
And that this part of this is predicated on Jax Forrest and Sergio Vega will absolutely go with the new system
Yeah.
because they've won national titles as true freshmen, and it gives them 4 more years to do that. Whereas the old system, no matter how many red shirts they take, they would still only get 3 tournaments. So they would get that extra tournament. We feel like they're definitely going to pick the new rules, which means the Rainies don't have the flexibility of either of those guys redshirting within the next 4 years.
Yeah. And the Rainies are also a unique case because they're already qualified for Olympic red shirts due to their Greco success. And whether they decide to use that to pursue a Greco team or just to increase their eligibility time, we're not sure, right? But it does give them added flexibility. So they could have a red shirt as well as an Olympic red shirt and then possibly any medical red shirts.
And to kind of talk through this, before 5 for 5, there was like a way to do Jax at 33 this year, one Rainey at 41 this year, and then Sergio Vega at 149 this year, and redshirt a Rainey.
Yep.
The next year, you could redshirt the other Rainey and go 33, 41, 49 again. And both Rainies would still have 4 years of eligibility.
Yep.
But then when you get closer to the Olympics, there was kind of this thought that it was possible that Jax would redshirt at some point to try to build into 65 kg instead of 61 kg and then go 141 that next year. And if he were to do that, like hypothetically in that year, you could have a Rainey at 33 and a Rainey at 41. So there was like maybe not a clear path to 4 years for both Rainies, but kind of a way where you saw them both with 2 to 3 years competing. And now, because Sergio Vega and Jax Forrest are just going to be in the lineup for the next 4 years, their path is a little less certain, and maybe that flexibility benefits them more than the 5 for 5 rules. And I think it kind of would benefit USA Wrestling because I think for the Greco team, those guys would be the USA Wrestling, even if they don't necessarily make the team, would be highly incentivized to have them compete to make the team because on paper they are 2 of the better guys at those lighter Greco weights, and in freestyle those are crowded with Jax, Bo, Vito, Marcus. But in Greco, I think if you could get both those guys on the team, that would be cool. And you would probably want to Olympic redshirt if that was the path you're taking because Greco's so different, right? Like you
they
don't
don't
want
need to practice stand-ups or single legs, right? They need to work specific Greco. And yeah, I do. And they are immediate contenders to make the 2028 Greco team. I mean, they are. Jordan has already made a team. Jaden has been in they don't do Final X, but he has been in the World Team Trials finals for Greco. So they are both immediate contenders for the 2028 Olympic Greco team. So it does make sense from not only a lineup perspective and in maximizing their eligibility for Oklahoma State, but it also makes the most sense for them to fall under the old rules for USA Wrestling and for our Greco team.
Yeah, so they're one that it will be interesting to see since they have the choice what they choose because that's a good example of how 5 for 5 may not be the most beneficial for every incoming freshman.
Yep.
And then I think if we transition to Penn State, you have all these Penn State guys that they're all going to have to choose a certain way of eligibility because it makes way more sense for them. But because some of these younger guys are almost certainly going to choose the 5 for 5, it makes problems in their lineup from 57 to 174. It makes them much more immediate than they were under the old system. And so at those three weights, I've written down 5 guys, and I didn't even write down Joe Seeley. So there's almost 6 guys for
Are you
these.
including Asher Cunningham?
No, I would think he's an 84, but I mean, I guess he could be a 74.
I
And
think they're
then
trying to build him into an 84 because of how crowded they
yeah.
are.
So the 5 I want to talk about, knowing that there are guys like Joe Seeley and Asher Cunningham that are possibly make it even more crowded than this, are Tyler Kasak at 57, who's been there, Will Hinkle at 174, who has been at Penn State but not been in the lineup yet, and then our Mitchell Messenbrink, the 165-pound, like returning national champ, and then these 2 young guys that are almost certainly going to get not just the 5 for 5, but 5 NCAA tournaments
Yeah.
in Jaden James and PJ Duke.
Yeah.
Because I think in under the old system, we thought Jaden James is 17. He'll probably redshirt. He's super young. That would put like a Kasak at 157, a Messenbrink at 165, and then PJ Duke may redshirt because he's building into that 65-74 range, and that gives Will Hinkle a year at 174.
Yeah.
Well, now I think you're like, can Jaden James make 157 the first year? It looks like it. So that's probably where he's going to try to go. And then Mitchell Messenbrink and PJ Duke, one of them at 165, one of them at 174. And that leaves Hinkle out of the lineup as well.
Yeah.
I think why this one's interesting to talk about with 5 for 5, though, is if you look at this from like Jaden James' perspective or PJ Duke's perspective, it benefits them because they get a 5th tournament,
Yeah.
right? If you look at it from Will Hinkle's perspective, it's hard to see how this benefits him because the change in rules took his window, his immediate window, and kind of made it a lot harder to see.
Yes.
Will Hinkle, he came in where Levi Haynes, he knew when Levi Haynes was graduating and he knew when Mitchell Messenbrink was graduating. And Levi's gone next year. So Hinkle maybe had that year with the old rules and maybe doesn't now. And then Messenbrink is gone the year after. And it looks like it really opens up.
Yeah.
But that was before Jaden James and PJ Duke had 5 years and we're looking for a redshirt year in there somewhere. So now you have probably this coming year, James, Duke, Messenbrink at those 3 weights. And then the next year when Messenbrink's gone, if you're Will Hinkle, your only window is still based on if Jaden James and PJ Duke can still make 57 and 65 because you're too big for any of those weights besides 174. So
Yeah.
it's like I kind of think PJ Duke will go 174 this coming year and Mitchell will stay at 165. I think it could go the other way, but if that were the case, then PJ would certainly be the 174 the following year. I think it's possible Jaden James moves up to 165 when Mitchell Messenbrink clears out. And then you're looking at Kasak and Joe Seeley battling for 157, but guys like Will Hinkle are out of the mix because of the 5 for 5 and no red shirts to defer. So it definitely takes a crowded area at Penn State where there was a lot of flexibility and it stays just as crowded. And now there's a lot less flexibility.
Absolutely. Yeah. You do see Jaden James. I just saw he's going to be enrolling this year. There was a lot of talk that he may do a gap year, and I think that would have given more flexibility
For
forward
Kasak, not
for
for Hinkle.
Kasich. But Henkel, we saw last year PJ Duke was cutting a lot of weight to make 157. I think that's completely out of the picture. Even when he registered for the U.S. Open, He redshirted at 74. Or sorry, that was the World Team Trials. He redshirted at 74 kilos, right, which is 163. We all think he's on 165 or 174. I mean, I think that's pretty much the general consensus. He's not going back down to 157.
Well, and this affects PJ because I think we thought that red shirt was
Yep.
because while he couldn't make 57 anymore, he's probably small for 74
Yep.
and Mitchell's at 65. Mitchell could be the one that goes up. I'm not saying that's not a possibility that's on the table. But if you're trying to do the 57 to 174 like Levi Haynes, if you had a red shirt year to build into 174, that would help you. But now you can't turn down that fifth tournament if you're
Yep.
PJ Duke. So you have to find a place at 165 or 174 next season.
Yep. And we may see Mitchell at 74, right? With our talk about U23s and him going potentially 79 kilos at U23 Worlds, which is right before the season. I think we could see him at 174. But again, that still doesn't alleviate things for someone like a Will Hinkle, who we think super highly of, who we think is, a potential national title threat next year. And he
Yeah,
may not even get the opportunity to be in the lineup.
yeah, it's hard to see a path for him long term with these guys. And he's a good example to use when you talk about how 5 for 5 changes high school recruiting and how high school recruits make decisions.
Yeah.
Because I think Will Hinkle was smart enough to look at who was already at Penn State before he committed, and he knew when Mitchell Messenbrink graduated and when Levi Haynes graduated. I think it's unrealistic to ask a high school recruit to look at the classes coming in behind them and be like, who in these classes could also challenge you for your spot? Because one, these blue chip kids are going to think, whatever, I'll beat this guy. I'm older than him. But two, it's just almost impossible to predict all the scenarios where that could happen. I
Yeah.
would assume when Will Hinkle committed to Penn State, Jaden James was committed to Virginia Tech
Yes, he
and had
was.
had flipped later on. So asking a kid like Will Hinkle to predict a talent like Jaden James will flip to Penn State and then predict the NCAA will change their eligibility so Jaden James is incentivized to compete right away.
Yeah.
Is was obviously never going to happen. So
Yeah.
he's a very good example of how the change in rules and the incentive for certain individuals to pick the new eligibility rules will affect the windows to compete at some of these teams that have a lot of depth. And I would say while Oklahoma State and Penn State are the prime examples of that, an Iowa, an Ohio State, even like a Minnesota, those teams will have kids that are put in somewhat similar positions.
Like, for instance, we could talk about Ohio State with at 125. They have Antonio Mills and they have Dominic Munaretto coming in. And we think that both of them initially are going to be 125 pounders. We don't really see Ben Davino going up to 141. And that automatically kind of takes a year away from them because one of them is going to have to start at 125. And they already have guys there, right? They already have Buzakis. Now, I think Buzakis is going to go up, but, right, they
Yeah.
still have guys. And so, it's very interesting. And I think we are going to really see this year seniors affected. These rising high school seniors are going to be super affected by this change in eligibility. Because, coaches had previously thought about a team and they thought, okay, well, we're going to have 5 years with the guy and they're going to have 4 years to compete. And so we can do a little moving here, a little moving there. Now, especially with these rising seniors, there is no option to go into the old rules. So they are going to have to come in and they're going to have to compete for a spot right away. And they know that if they go somewhere and there's a returning All-American and they're not a blue chip, a top 5 guy in their weight, they are probably right, not going to beat that guy out. And so they know, well, hey, this guy is going to be a junior. He's going to have three more NCAA tournaments, right? Hopefully I can develop and beat him and all of that. But just realistically, I could go to this place and I only have two NCAA tournaments to compete at. And so I think that that's something that's going to really change recruiting for your teams that are not your Iowa, your Penn State, your Oklahoma State, your Ohio State, right? Like a UNI, for instance. I think their recruiting is going to change. Um, and I think it could be a positive. It could absolutely be a positive for a place like a UNI. It could be a positive for a place like who are your favorite MAC teams? Ryder, George
I think
Mason?
Ryder and George Mason both do a really good job. I think it's hard not to talk about like Lockhaven, but yeah,
Yeah.
I work a table at the MAC every year. And I've coached some Virginia high school kids that have ended up at like Anthony Luciani started as a true freshman at 133 for George Mason.
Yep.
And I know like when he was making that decision, it's like there was a clear path to start at George Mason already. And then it's like it's never been easier to transfer. So like if you get too good where you feel like your options are much different than they were when you were coming out of high school, you can always transfer up. So I do think one of the positive impacts for these smaller schools is I know Scotty Sentes isn't at Campbell anymore, but you could take the Scotty Sentes Campbell approach and say, we will develop you and make you good. And if you transfer somewhere and get a bunch of money of NIL money from one of these blue blood programs, we will sit in the stands and cheer for you that year and be proud of how we developed you as a wrestler and the opportunities you ended up with by starting at a Campbell and Scotty Sentes situation. So I do think that's like an interesting way to look at that like middle tier D1 kid where maybe the path to start at even like say an Ohio State, a Minnesota as a freshman is not there, but to start at like a Rider, the opportunity is there. And then, if those programs can sell it in a way where they don't make you feel like you do something wrong if you transfer and end up at, you go to Little Rock for a couple of years and then you go to Iowa for a couple of years. I'm sure it sucks for Little Rock to lose guys they've poured into and developed. But maybe you can get some kids that wouldn't consider your program because they can start there and make an impact right away.
Yep. And they know that they're going to go there and they're going to develop if they buy in and they do things right. And absolutely, I think that this can really help a lot of your lower tier schools, even, the schools that we don't think about very often that, and I'm not going to name them, but that don't really get a lot of higher level recruits. And it can really, really benefit like your UNIs. That's who I think of because, now maybe Iowa and Iowa State, right? The best guys in the state of Iowa, they're going to see, oh, well, hey, they're going out to California and getting this kid, or they're going to PA and getting these two kids, or New Jersey to get that kid. But the best kid in the state of Iowa, who's ranked fourth in the country, who traditionally has always gone to either Iowa or Iowa State, he doesn't see a path to start there for 2 years. So he says, all right, well, let me go join the Schwab mom, right? Get on the Panther train. And he goes there and he loves it, right? People don't go to UNI and transfer out very often. And it's by design, right? It's a culture that Doug Schwab's built there. And we could see that program take another jump, right? We can see him get those higher level recruits and develop them the same way that he's developed guy after guy after guy. And maybe as a true freshman, they come in and they're a round of 16 guy. And then the next year, they're getting fourth at the NCAA tournament.
Well,
And
and there
he
are a
decides,
hand
hey, we're going to stay. Doug Schwab gets NIL money for them. He gets them hooked up with a truck or something, and they stay.
Well, and there are a handful of programs in UNI's tier that have shown if you're good enough to win a national title, you can win it at those places. And UNI is certainly one of those places because Parker Keckheisen and Drew Foster won national titles at
Yep.
UNI. But there are, I think Northwestern is an example of, like they don't always have a guy in the NCAA finals, but like if Sebastian Rivera had gotten that COVID year at Northwestern, I think he was the favorite to win it.
I do too.
Jason Surtsis won a title there. Jake Herbert won a title there. Missouri is a place where, like, even post Askren, like Aiden Sinclair hasn't won a title yet, but there's no reason to think he can't do it at Missouri based on what
Absolutely.
Missouri has done with other guys like Jaden Cox or Ben Askren. Or so I do think those programs can benefit a lot because they've shown they know what to do with the blue chip kids when they get them. They just don't get as many as the Ohio State, Minnesota, Michigan, Penn State, Oklahoma State tier of school.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe a kid chooses a program like that to get that fifth tournament to compete in.
Yeah.
And there are certainly programs in that tier that can get kids to stay the whole time and accomplish all of their goals at that program. I think UNI is a prime example of that, and I'm dressed to support that view. But I think that it's not even the only one.
Absolutely. And yeah, and I view this overall as something that can really be a net positive. I do think we are going to see, right, our blue bloods, our Iowa, Oklahoma State, Ohio State, Nebraska, right? They've really come on. Penn State kind of take another leap. Virginia Tech, right? With the way that they're recruiting, I think we're going to see them take another step up. That being said, though, I think we can see other programs really benefit from this, right? I think when we saw NIL passed and we kind of knew, right, this is going to make the rich richer and everybody else have to kind of struggle even more to try to keep up. This is something, though, that I think we can see, right, the other side of that, where it can really benefit your programs that have kind of been left behind or the rules have made life much more difficult for them. And so I
Well,
overall I'm a big fan of this. And I'll be
yeah,
very interested to see what the transfer portal looks like after the season.
yeah, because I do think for as much talk and credit as Penn State and Oklahoma State, and maybe more Penn State, but they get a lot of credit for retaining their talent, even if those guys don't have a window. And so, like I would kind of be surprised if Joe Seeley or Will Hinkle transfer out of Penn State because their
Yeah,
guys just tend not to transfer out. Like, I mean, there's examples, Terrell Bearclaw to Utah Valley, but for the most part, those guys feel like that's the best place to get better and they keep their talent. Um, I do think that those are the exceptions in that tier of program. And so even those really, really successful programs you mentioned, like a Virginia Tech and or a Nebraska, like I think Virginia Tech's gonna end up being really crowded at like 57, 65.
oh yeah,
And some of those high recruits that don't have a path to the lineup, I'm sure Virginia Tech wants them at Virginia Tech because it makes their team better and their room better. But I think as fans, like we would love to see the guy, like if Noah Nittinger wins the spot at 65, we would love to see Drew Gorman go somewhere else where he can wrestle and compete and get to see him at the NCAA tournament as well.
absolutely.
And I do think that tier of program that tends to happen.
Yeah,
Virginia Tech couldn't keep Eddie Ventresca and Cooper Flynn because they could only start one of them at 125. And I think we as wrestling fans were better for it when Cooper Flynn was starting for Minnesota and Eddie Ventresca was an All-American for Virginia Tech. They got to keep their best guy and the guy they wanted to keep the most. And we got to see both guys compete and wrestle like high level schedules. I think
yeah,
that's good for the fan.
absolutely. And I also think it's going to be good for the high school kids as well. Um, Past this year's senior class. I do have a lot of empathy for them in this situation because I think we're going to see programs that had previously been recruiting them kind of realize they're not going to really consider us because we already have this guy here. But for your ages younger than that, I think it's going to give them a lot more clarity on where they want to go and where there is really a path for them. And so that I look forward to seeing because I do think it's going to really be beneficial.
I think that this can kind of like split high school kids into two paths early on. Like I was talking to some parents about this earlier this week. They're they're kids that are considering doing an extra eighth grade year or have done an extra eighth grade year. I think you're still going to have that camp, especially with the 19 instead of 18
Yes.
NCAA rule, like we talked about, where doing that second eighth grade year maximizes your college options, right? Where it's the difference between going to a rider and going to a like a D2 or D3 program for
Yeah.
some of those kids. So why would you not take that extra year if those are the kinds of opportunities you're looking for? And so I think that's like most kids, right? That's that middle tier D1 kid. But I also think this is where you're going to see more Jax Forrest, Jaden James get to college as soon as possible
Yep.
because while Jaden James is not going to do it, he has now gotten through high school and he could do a gray shirt year at Nittany Lion Wrestling Club if he wanted to. And I
Yep.
think the tier of wrestler that Jax Forrest, Bo Bassett, Melvin Miller, Jaden James, PJ Duke, that blue, Marcus Blaze, right? Like that, it's like we knew they were going to be in contention for a national title as soon as they got there. And it didn't necessarily matter if it was next season or this season, right? If Jax could do it this year, why couldn't Bo or Melvin? If PJ could almost do it last year, why couldn't Jaden James?
Yep.
So I think you may see those kids forego that eighth grade year because they're going to have whatever college options they want,
Yep.
and then push the flexibility down to the gap year, so to speak, between high school and college. Because while there's specific ways to defer the eligibility after you turn 19, you can still do that gray shirt. And if you don't enroll in college,
Yep.
if you haven't turned 19, because your
Yep.
clock hasn't started. And Jaden James is that age.
He's
I
still
believe,
17, I believe.
yeah,
Yeah.
like he's that age where he could take that one more year if he wanted to. I mean, Jax would have had the 5 years if next year was his first year.
Yep.
So he did not need to leave early, but it's hard to say he did it wrong because he won the whole thing.
Oh,
And so I think you can definitely kind of see like two different paths where depending on where the kid is as a kind of like seventh, eighth grader, that holdback decision may change. Whereas I think before a lot of the kids in Jack's Forest tier thought, well, there's no downside to taking it. And now it's like we may see them defer it to after high school if they
yeah.
want to, since there's no redshirt option.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Um,
I'm very curious to see what this is going to look like in 5 years. I do again. I'm on the side of it's positive. I
yeah,
am. I've heard some of the negativities with it, and I agree. Right there, it's really hard for your rising seniors. It is, and it makes their life more difficult, more crowded. But I'm tired of seeing guys be 25 years old and wrestling in, their third NCAA tournament and thinking, oh my goodness, we have another year.
yeah. I think it may not be a perfect solution, but it's a definitive solution to a problem we all acknowledge did exist. And so while we know some guys are going to be forced to choose the old rules like a Ryan Crookham, and this new system would really hurt guys like that in the future. Um, it does solve that problem in a definitive way, like you're talking about. I
Yep.
also wanted to go through, there's some interesting older guys that almost certainly will opt into the new eligibility rules.
Yep.
We talked about guys that are kind of forced to use the old rules because they would like either be out of eligibility or they need to be able to defer their eligibility to find a path to the lineup. And we said like a Tyler Kasak or a Ryan Crookham or a Will Hinkle is an
Yep.
example of that. Um, if you have not taken a freshman red shirt, and no matter what year of college you are in, it probably benefits you to opt into the 5-for-5 and
Oh
take
yeah.
an extra tournament, because that also means you started as a true freshman. And
Yep.
so, like, Marcus Blaze and Jax Forrest and Sergio Vega are like fresh in our minds of having done that. Um, Joey Blaze did that, and
Yep.
he would this 5-for-5 would give him another year. Cam McDaniel, who we were talking about for the U23 World Team, like he All-Americaned as a true freshman, kind of surprised some people. Then he did it again and showed people it shouldn't have been a surprise his true freshman year. He would get a fifth year, or almost certainly will get a fifth year when he opts into the new way. Luke Lillidahl wrestled as a true freshman. So this new rule, while it maybe doesn't benefit the Rainey twins or Will Hinkle, it benefits a list of guys that are already in college as well. This isn't just five tournaments for Jax Forrest and Bo Bassett. I think Cam McDaniel and Joey Blaze are good examples of guys that are going to get a fifth tournament because they decided to wrestle right away.
Yep.
And were competitive as true freshmen and have not used a red shirt of any kind yet in college. And I mean, at the NCAA tournament, I saw all the tape on Joey Blaze. So there's no way he was healthy and he chose not to use a medical. And I think that's the behavior this new system is trying to reward
Yes,
is
for sure.
is nobody's 100% at that tournament. If you've wrestled a full D1 schedule, but if you can like go try to win it anyways, like Joey Blaze did last year, then you're rewarded. He's rewarded, like retroactively for that decision of not trying to like make it a medical by getting a fifth tournament that he would not have had, or that he would have had to use a medical and chosen not to wrestle at it. So, and I think we like that, right? Like we
Yeah.
like those guys like Joey Blaze that are like, hey, like I may not be 100%, but tape my fingers, tape my knees. Like we're gonna get as ready as we can be, and we're gonna see what we can do. I think Killian Cardinale is like a deep pull
Yes.
example of that. Of the only year he All-Americaned, his ACL was torn.
Yep.
And it's like, but he just knew like he wasn't gonna be able to like keep going through the college grind, and it was like he was supposed to graduate, and it's like, let me just get to this tournament and see what I can do. And those are really cool stories when they happen. I think Killian, um, he was like a seated in the 20s, I believe,
Yep.
was like a surprise All-American that won some people some fantasy pools. And that's like, that's a cool moment for him, his coaches, forever, that is more incentivized now with the 5-for-5 rules.
And one other big benefit I hope that we see is more in-season tournaments. And by that, I mean, I remember being in high school in the Midlands was incredible.
Yeah.
Or when we first started coaching together and we went to
And
the
we went to
Southern
the
Scuffle,
scuffle. Yeah.
and it was awesome. And you had Penn State's guys there, and you had Oklahoma State's guys and Cornell's guys there. And
We
we've
had a
kind
real
of gotten,
Budo nickel at scuffle. It was like a crazy 174 match. Yeah.
yes, it was. Um, and we've kind of gotten away from them. We haven't really seen that like since. Cliff Keen has been kind of our most consistent, and then this year with the addition of national duels, which I love, right? It's kind of gotten weaker. And so what I'm hoping is now that we don't have all these weird red shirt rules and you can only five weigh-ins and things like that. Now what I'm hoping is guys are trying to wrestle a bunch more matches. Especially your guys that are coming in and maybe they don't have a path to start, right? But they know and they love to compete. And so they're going to show up at the Southern Scuffle. And we may see a bunch of really good guys there again. And that's really what I'm hoping that we see as a
Yeah.
benefit of this.
Well, because there's no benefit to like wrestling attached versus unattached now
Yeah.
with the new eligibility. So you would hope that the coaches are incentivized to find these kids matches, even if they're not starters, because it doesn't affect their eligibility. And then you would hope the kids want to do it. I think even like dual lineup flexibility gets better because you don't have to sit a guy. Because I would think like the Buzakis Macron situation from last year is like, McCrone was not a freshman, so he didn't have the 5 dates. He just couldn't wrestle anything attached.
Yeah.
But it's like under these new rules, every time you didn't want to have Buzakis make weight, you could have wrestled McCrone, and it wouldn't have changed McCrone's eligibility if they
Yeah.
were both under the new system. So when you take, you know, the downside being not all these guys can wrestle at the NCAA tournament at the end of the year, but that upside being like even like in Iowa, when you're like, why is like Harvey Luddington really their only backup at these like 3 weights? Why does Gabe Arnold have to wrestle 3 weights to fill a lineup? It's like
Yeah.
now, well, because you the other guys there can't afford to lose the eligibility or the red shirt that are in the room, and so now you have a situation where, since that's not the case, you can take your true second best guy. And yeah, like not every D1 team has like an awesome 1 and 2 guy, but some of those high end Big Ten teams in Oklahoma State, like they have deep rooms, and
Yeah.
we don't always get to see it because they're trying to protect the eligibility of the guy that's not the starter.
Overall, I think it's a net positive, like you said, because we're going to see less gamification of the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you can make the rules as clear as they are, because eligibility, I was looking it up. It used to be this PDF that you had to download and scroll, 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 and you would see, and it was very dependent based on sport as well. And now that's gone, right? No longer do I have to hear about players that are 23 years old from Europe coming and joining Alabama's basketball team and, oh, what does their eligibility look like and blah, blah, blah. No, like, here's the rules, right? You show up and you wrestle them, and or you compete in the sport. And that's what I'm happy to see. And I'm happy that guys that are coming into college now have the ability to compete pretty much as they want. And that was something that I think was a little upsetting to me with these red shirts is you barely got to see them wrestle. And I'm happy that we've gotten away from that. I'm very, very pleased about that. All right. Anything else from you?
No, I think that's it. Next we are gonna talk about youth wrestling, our experience as youth wrestling coaches, and we're going to talk about the parts of youth wrestling that need to suck and the
Yes.
parts that needlessly suck. I
Yes.
think that's a good way to say it because like we assume our audience is entirely wrestling people and possibly my mom,
Yes.
but like there are parts of wrestling that are like objectively like they are just going to be hard, and you have to embrace the grind of that hard aspect of the sport. And then there are parts of youth wrestling that are difficult for the parent and difficult for the kid, that are not that don't necessarily need to be difficult
Correct.
to endure. And we're going to kind of like differentiate between the two things and talk about the things we wish parents would kind of like suck up and deal with in the youth wrestling thing, and the things we wish youth wrestling would fix or change,
Yeah.
and kind of like have that conversation.
Yeah. The things that shouldn't change and don't need to change, even if you may not like it. And then the aspects that we see that really do need to change, because it's hurting our sport, I think, and it's hurting the experience of the kids, the parents, and the coaches in many cases. Um, but all right, Stephen, we'll
All
talk
right,
about that next week.
sounds good.